Lenin's work and the enormous achievements that have occurred in the country after his death. In making this film, Vertov aimed to show the truth about Lenin and his contributions to the development of Soviet nation and citizenry. He actually wrote the following. He wrote, "This film translates poorly into verbal language," and indeed it does, it, as you'll see in a minute when I turn it on. Though in its image language, it is easily accessible to any popular audience. It is on the one hand, a group of film documents on Lenin's death, on his last 40 kilometers, on Lenin's final route from Gorky to Moscow. It is on the other, Lenin in motion on film, a compendium of the film documents of Lenin that have been preserved, our film heritage of Lenin. From still another perspective, it is an interior monologue proceeding from the old to the new, from the past to the present, from slavery to the free and civilized life of the man liberated by the revolution. In this paper, I focus on the representation of Muslim women in the East, particularly on what the film posits as transitioning from slavery to the free and civilized life of the women that the revolution is credited with liberating. I will analyze the representations of the first song, "My Face Was in a Black Prison," juxtaposing it with the history and lived experience of women in Central Asia during the Soviet Union. So the film starts with a description of Lenin as friend and liberator of the oppressed. And there's actually like a text snapshot which reads, "These songs are of a woman who has cast off her veil, of electricity that bring lights to the villages, of water that makes the desert recede, of the illiterate who have become literate. In all of this, and Lenin being one." There's a direct association with deveiling, progress, and education, all credited to Lenin. In fact, the quotation frames and summarizes the entire film, as there's a chronological progression from the covered enslaved women to a swift deveiling and empowerment through technological and economic progress, credited to Lenin, as you will see right now as I share my screen and start the film while I continue my presentation. So I'll just mute the sound so it's not too distracting. Okay, so this is the first song. It begins with what we can term before Lenin. A woman fully covered in a white yashmak, as you can see, walks on a dirt road. Next, a mosque with intricate geometric patterns. The woman continues to walk, and the men and boys are filmed walking out of the mosque with turbans and loose clothing. You'll see that momentarily. Another woman wearing a black yashmak appears, followed by a text that reads, "My face was in a dark prison." Then another woman in a white yashmak, followed by text, "I led a blind life." Then an old, barefooted, destitute woman struggling to walk, and next, turban-clad men praying by the mosque. The next text, "In ignorance and darkness, I was a slave." There you go, "I led a blind life." So this song happens to be about 15 minutes, so that's why I will read it, and it may not be synchronized with what you see. So apologies for that. So the next text reads, "In ignorance and darkness, I was a slave without chains." A woman carrying a large chest on her head walks after a donkey carrying baggage and a boy. The man praying at the mosque, an imam with a turban saying the adhan, turban-clad men on horses. Thus the association of veiled women, dirt roads, poverty, Islam, and women's enslavement is established in the initial part of the film and in this first song. Consequently, the song outlines the dawn of Lenin, framed and summarized succinctly in this quote displayed as "this dawn begins." And you will see this text soon, but a ray of truth began to shine, the dawn of Lenin's truth. A woman with an uncovered face sits by a window and writes, while 4 boys march on the street with trumpets and drums. The woman then reads, and the number of boys marching gradually increase. The woman sitting by the window looks outside, perhaps as a reaction to the sounds of the march. The second woman in this sequence is a veiled woman leaving her house as the boys continue to march. The veiled woman with an uncovered face is then shown holding a book while walking on the street. So you can quickly see the association between Lenin, Soviet Union, and education from the initial, there she is reading a book, from the initial just covered face and enslaved woman. Haphazardly, another woman wearing a yashmak suddenly flips over the yashmak, revealing her smiling face as she walks down the street. There's a momentous, and of course this is a momentous event, a metaphor for Central Asian women's liberation, credited to Lenin and the liberator in this film. Although we still see instances of Russian media that claim to liberate women still today. There is a film, I forgot the director's name, but it's called Anna, and that's one example. There, the ethnic Russians help out a Tajiki girl. They give her, like, they engage her in domestic labor, and then the woman buys her Western clothes, and she takes off her veil, and suddenly everything, the sun begins to rise and shine. In any case, going back to this film, after this dawn of Lenin, the sun begins to rise and bring light over darkness. Women are again filmed walking on the street, but this time their faces are uncovered and hopeful, and with newfound agential power. A woman wearing a skirt, a coat, and a headscarf goes to the Turkic Women's Club. Another woman in a yashmak suddenly decides to uncover her face while walking on the street. The newspapers, medical examination, musical instruments, and books that surround the women and are a part of their daily life are deployed in the film as images that represent a new, developed, cultured Central Asia. The women are no longer powerless, lost, enslaved beings. They play musical instruments, congregate in cultural centers, write and read books about Lenin. Then the following text appears on the screen. We never saw him, we never heard his voice, but he is as a father to us, even more. Veiled girls are shown in a school, followed by this text. No father ever did as much for his children as Lenin did for us. Thus, the link between Lenin, liberation, and education are established in the film, the brightness of the Lenin sun. The next part of this song promulgates economic and industrial development, in which women are represented in a central role. Girls and women with hair covered and uncovered are filmed walking and smiling as they navigate their new lifestyles. They're riding bicycles, attending university, operating and fixing machinery, tilling the land, and harvesting wheat, cotton, and berries. Their liberation appears as proportional to the socioeconomic and industrial development of the USSR, facilitated by the vision of the glorious Lenin. Close to the end of the sequence, there is footage of an urban vista and a military parade, gesturing to Lenin's funeral, which is the focus of the second song. Meanwhile, the following text is interspersed throughout the footage, such as this one, My State Farm, while the women are engaged in those activities. There's also My Country, My Land, He Made Light of Darkness, A Garden of the Desert, and A Life of Death. And then My University, My Factory, My Collective Farm, and so on. You might see some more of those as I go on. The project of creating and promulgating the idea of a unified new socialist nation, the USSR, out of an immensely diverse populace is apparent here. The text leads us through a sequence of texts beginning with my and he, establishing a relationship of belonging of the individual my with the action of the he that made all of it possible, culminating in a almost Jesus Christ-like sacrifice where, and I quote from the movie, he gave us all he had, his mind, blood, and heart. Throughout the film, Lenin is indeed framed as a prophetic figure in a classic narrative of a dark world enlightened by a prophet who arrived and saved the people, liberating the enslaved, feeding the poor, curing the ill. Vertov appears to have chosen Central Asian women to demonstrate the greatness of Lenin because Vertov, according to his own writing, viewed them as triply emancipated, thanks to the USSR. And by that, he meant sexual, cultural, and class oppression. This resonates with the mission of the unveiling campaign of the Communist Party, which imagined Central Asian women as potential proletariat, believing that if the party offered them liberation, they would become loyal transformers of society, according to what Gregory Marcel wrote in his book, The Surrogate Proletariat. Women became symbols for tradition and transformation to a modern proletariat. In 1927, the Communist Party began its campaign for the rapid transformation of Uzbek women's lives, entitled Hujum, to bring them into public life, paid work, education, and membership in the party, as represented in the first song of Vertov's 3 songs about Lenin, which I analyzed in this paper, in which deveiling was a potent symbol. However, unlike the smooth and happy transformation from tradition to modernity, from veiling to unveiling, the deveiling campaign did not bring about a sudden liberation and empowerment of women. In fact, many women were murdered for unveiling, propelling many others to continue the practice of full body veiling, according to Marianne Camp in her exemplary book, The New Woman in Uzbekistan. And according to Shoshana Keller, in her book, To Moscow, Not Mecca, the Soviet Campaign Against Islam in Central Asia, according to Keller, while the Communist Party encouraged and even pressured women to unveil in public, families insisted on veiling. Thus, in Uzbekistan, writes Camp, women resisted, if women resisted state pressure, they complied with social pressure. So you're interpolated between the patriarchy or the state. So the Hujum vision failed through the complex, according to Douglas Northrop in his Veiled Empire, Gender and Power in Central Asia, the Hujum vision failed through, and I quote, the complex social and subaltern strategies pursued by individual Uzbek men and women in dealing with an alien state, ranging from apparent support to active opposition, from studied obliviousness to passive resistance to the spreading of gossip and rumors. This is similar to the reaction of this aggressive modernization campaign in other parts of Central Asia. Yet Vertov asserted that and I quote here from his journal, "We strive to show people unmasked, not acting. We strive to film people so that they do not notice, to read in faces the thoughts that Kino Eye revealed." In this respect, 3 songs of Lenin offers examples of, quote, non-acting. The address of the Neprostoy women, shock worker, the decorated woman from the kolkhoz, and others. However, it is not enough just to film bits of truth. These bits must be organized in order to produce a truth of the whole. It's fascinating that Vertov aimed to produce a truth of the whole, but in fact, it was a selective truth that glorified Lenin and overlooked the reality of the lived experience of the women of Central Asia. Further, this film disregards the suffering and the death of the women caused by the hegemonic modernization campaign of the USSR. It is, however, a potent tool of propaganda for Lenin and the idea of communism, because it visually represents women as liberated through a revolution. And perhaps that's why it received more international acclaim than domestic. The power of visual representation as a technique of persuasion, swiftly noted and deployed by Lenin himself at that moment of early cinema, is deployed here in an irrefutable way because of the documentary style footage and the authenticity that filming on location transmits. Overall, this film remains a powerful example of how women's bodies and subjectivities are used and continue to be used today for political power and nation building. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasemin, for this fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed it. For the questions, we will wait until the end of all presentations. So Valentyna sent a message that she's not coming to present. So we have 4 presenters with Yasemin. So you will have more time than 15 minutes. So it's fair. Now it's Sheirbayev Ozhet's paper. He's from Nazarbayev University, Kazakhstan, and he will be presenting a paper on comparative overlook to the Central Asian political transit scenarios. The floor is yours, Sheirbayev.
Thank you very much. 1 second. Yes. Okay, do you see it? Can you see?
We see the presentation, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. One important point, I'm not from Nazarbayev University, as I wrote, I'm an alumni from a new, I work as an independent research. Well, my presentation, my paper is about comparative overlook to the Central Asian political transit scenarios. Mainly it's about succession of power in Central Asian countries. So plan, firstly, we will look at the current models of power transition, which we have in Central Asian countries, which means Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Each country will be overlooked separately, some main nuances, and third, what's important is only dates and facts will be used here. So, okay, the models of transit, according to the Hale, is a la Deng Xiaoping, when you have slight transition of power without dying in office, without the electoral transit, without some kind of problems. It's like in Kazakhstan, and what is a best example is Deng Xiaoping by himself, how he transited power, and the case of Singapore, when Lee Kuan Yew slightly gone to the shadows, but he preserved the post of the minister counselor as guy who stands over the president and give him the counsels how he have to do to act in this or in this situation. Death in office, it's one of the not good scenarios for autocratic countries like Turkmenistan and in Uzbekistan. But as we will see further, mainly for the country itself, it was mainly successful. And electoral transit, which we can see in Kyrgyzstan and in Tajikistan. Why it's written here that in Kyrgyzstan it's semi-successful? Because not every electoral transit is good in Kyrgyzstan, and it's good. So, for instance, Mr. Atambayev, he was elected according to the constitution. Last year in August or September, he was taken to the jail. Another example of Mr. Bakiev, who also was elected by all the legislation, and now he's in Belarus as oh, you understand. And in Tajikistan, it's mainly successful. Okay, let us look here. In Tajikistan in 1994, during these elections, Mr. Emomali Rahmon wins. So he was not the first president of Tajikistan, but he still stands on the rule. What is important is, according to Mr. Ivanov, how Mr. Rahmon became the president in 1994. It was a period of the civil war in Tajikistan. And Mr. Rahmon, he found the support from the warlords who were in charge of the actual life in Tajikistan. In 1999, he made a referendum on prolongation of his term. In 2015, they get the law on peace and unity founding father, leader of nation. In 2016, there was a referendum and age qualification for president reduced to age of 30. Why is it important? Is because his son, Mr. Rustam Rahmon, is currently mayor of Dushanbe. And in near future, they will have the election of the president. And there was rumors, actually it was just rumors and the positions of several political scientists who suppose that his son, Mr. Rustam Rahmon, will try to go to the elections to become the president. But now Mr. Emomali Rahmon, he said that, okay, I will go to the elections. So we all suppose that Mr. Rahmon will be the president again. Why there was rumors and why there were thinkings that Rustam Rahmon will become the president? Because they were looking to the example of transit of power a la Deng Xiaoping, because when the ruler dies in the office, sometimes it's good for the country, but it's not good for relatives of the ruler. This is Mr. Rahmon and Mr. Rustam Rahmon. Kyrgyzstan, semi-electoral changes. So in 2005, we had the Tulip Revolution. In 2010, we had the revolution against Mr. Kurmanbek Bakiyev. Why? It was because Mr. Bakiyev, he was actually seduced by corruption. In 2016, they made the constitutional reform by strengthening of prime minister power. So they were moving to semi-presidential parliamentary system. And in 2017, Mr. Zheinbekov wins the presidential elections. Here, it's important to understand that Mr. Zheinbekov and Mr. Atambayev, the previous president, here it's Mr. Atambayev, it's Mr. Zheinbekov, they were from the one party. There were actually analysis and there was a proposal that Mr. Atambayev will become the prime minister of country when Mr. Zheinbekov will become the president. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And as I already said, in August last year, there were problem with Mr. Atambayev when the guys from the Committee of National Security, they came to his house. There was a siege of his house actually around for 2 days. And after 2 days, he said, okay, I'm going with you. And last 2 months ago, Mr. Atambayev, he was put into the jail. It's an important point because it means that parliamentary system, when we say about the parliamentary system, it works in Kyrgyzstan. But when we talk about the parties, we have to understand that it's not actually the parties, the moving forces, it's actually the clans which stands behind these parties. So Mr. Atambayev, Mr. Zheinbekov, the representatives of the coalition of the southern regions of Kyrgyzstan. Turkmenistan, here I will show you why it's bad when you do not make a transition a la Deng Xiaoping while you are alive. In 2007, Mr. Sapar Murat Niyazov died. Mr. Berdimuhamedov became acting president instead of Speaker of Parliament, Mr. Otaev, according to the constitution. According to the constitution, Mr. Otaev, he became the president next to Mr. Niyazov, but actually he said, no, I will not try to do it. Mr. Berdimuhamedov, he will do. Why? Because Mr. Berdimuhamedov, he take the support of Ahal Vilayat, of the main clan, which actually lives in Turkmenistan. And Mr. Niyazov, he also were representing the interests of this clan. So we can see Mr. Berdimuhamedov wins the elections with 89 of votes. In 2010, he gets the Arkadak title, it's stronghold of the nation, like Mr. Emomali Rahmon, by the constitutional law. In 2011, 18 heads of region were dismissed, and actually it's current practice of Mr. Berdimuhamedov when he criticized representatives of the regions. And his son, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, is currently governor of Ahal Vilayat. Before he was, as I remember, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. So he actually prepared him to his political career, as Mr. Rahmon is doing actually right now. Why is it important in case of Turkmenistan? Because the son of Mr. Niyazov, Sapar Murat Niyazov, the dead president of Turkmenistan, he was not in age to become some kind of politically significant. He was around 18 or 19 years old when his father died. And after the death of Mr. Sapar Murat Niyazov, his family just disappeared. Mr. Sapar Murat Niyazov, Mr. Berdimuhamedov, and son of Mr. Berdimuhamedov. And he is in the position of Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Uzbekistan, in Well, Mr. Karimov, he was one of the elders of the Central Asian region. In 1995, he prolonged his duties as president. In 2002, he made a referendum to extend his authority. In 2016, Mr. Shavkat Miziyoyev became acting president instead of Senate Speaker, Mr. Yuldashev. It's just like in Turkmenistan. Also, there were another person who wanted to become the acting president, Mr. Azimov, Rustam Azimov. He was deputy prime minister under Mr. Miziyoyev, but unfortunately, as we can see, he lost this political battle. 2 or 3 days after death of Mr. Karimov, Mr. Azimov just disappeared for 3 days. And during these 3 days, Mr. Miziyoyev became the acting president. After it, career of Mr. Azimov declined. Now he is head of some of kolkhoz, which is responsible for the chicken meat. In 2016, 2017, they get the deal with Mr. Inayatov. Mr. Inayatov is the former head of the Committee of National Security, KGB of Uzbekistan. And it's important because Mr. Inayatov, he was a Grey Cardinal under Mr. Karimov and had a strong relationship with his daughter, Dinara Karimov, who is actually now under judicial consideration. Main changes after death of Mr. Karimov. Mr. Karimov, he tried to distance from the real politics his last days. Instead of him, Mr. Miziyoyev, he's trying to act more actively, be more active in all the issues. So all issues of creation of special economic zones, for example, they established by the presidential decree, and all other important points of political, economical, social life in Uzbekistan is changing by the presidential decree. Mr. Karimov, Mr. Rustam Azimov, whose career is actually declined, and current president of Uzbekistan, Mr. Shavkat Mirziyoyev. And Kazakhstan, case of Kazakhstan in 2000, well, Mr. Nursultan Nazarbayev was ruling by Kazakhstan since 1989 when he was head of the Communist Party of Kazakhstan. In 2012, we take the law on first president, leader of nation, just like in Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. In 2018, there were changes in the Security Council legislation, by which I mean the strengthening the power of this organization, giving the head of this organization more duties, more responsibilities, and more power. And in 2019, 22nd to 21st March, he dismissed from the office. This is a good example of a la Deng Xiaoping scenario. Currently, Mr. Nursultan Nazarbayev is head of Security Council, Nur-Otan party, the leading party of Kazakhstan, Assembly of People of Kazakhstan. Why the Assembly of People of Kazakhstan is important? Because this organization has the quotas for the Senate, around 5 or 6 quotas, so 5 or 6 representatives from the Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan, they have quota to become the senators of Kazakhstan. Why the Senate of Kazakhstan is important? Because the chairman of Senate, in case if something happens with the president, became the acting president, like was with Mr. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, who actually was the chairman of the Senate. And when Mr. Nursultan Nazarbayev dismissed from the office, he became firstly the acting president of Kazakhstan. And as we can see here, he won the election with 76% of votes, which actually can be said in comparison with Mr. Nazarbayev and other presidents of the Central Asian republics, it's not so huge. Actually, they take around 99% during the elections. And what is important, Mr. Nazarbayev is a member of Constitutional Council. So as we can see here, Mr. Nazarbayev, he took all power, but now he trying to be in the shadows. And the main political figure is Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, but every important issue in the life of country have to be cancelled with the head of the Security Council, who is Mr. Nazarbayev. Here we can see the succession, no one of Central Asian countries do not take succession. There is a try in Tajikistan, there were try in Turkmenistan, but it didn't work. Kazakhstan, there were rumors that Dariga Nazarbayev will become the future president of Kazakhstan. She was the chairman of the Senate, but now she was dismissed from the office. Now she without a job, so no. And Uzbekistan, as we can see, no. Strongman, what does it mean, strongman? The strong ruler in the head of the country, on the top of the country, yes. Mainly, yes, in each country of Central Asia, like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, everyone tries to make his power absolute. Here, that's why we take such kinds of titles like leader of nation, Arkadak, Yelbasi, etc., etc., etc. The problems with Kyrgyzstan, they would try with Mr. Bakiyev and Mr. Almazbek Atambayev, but they tried actually failed. And no, we don't have we have the strongman from the economical social side in Uzbekistan, but mainly Mr. Miziyoyev, he tries to take expertise from the government. Preserve power, yes, in Tajikistan, in Turkmenistan, in Kazakhstan, yes and no. Why? Because actually Mr. Nazarbayev, he tries to preserve power, but he stepped out into the shadows. In Kyrgyzstan, no, they cannot preserve power just because they cannot do it. Because if they try to do it, they all know that they had already 2 or 3 revolutions. The person who came and say, I will take the power for the next decade, he'll be dismissed from office by the people. And in Uzbekistan, it's too early to say because Mr. Miziyoyev, it's his first term, maybe in the next terms. And transitions goes quietly, mainly, yes, except for Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And mainly when the transitions goes by the scenario of death in the office, it's good for country itself because it goes quietly. Nothing actually changed so critically, but it's bad for the family of the rulers, which actually in terms of country is not so important. So that's all my presentation. That's already said it. Thank you very much. I'm ready for questions after the session.
Okay, thank you, Sheirbayev, for this comprehensive comparison of the power transitions in Central Asia. Now, following your comparisons, we are going to talk about individual case of Uzbekistan. We have 2 papers coming on the analysis of internal strategies of Islam Karimov and Miziyoyev. And then our other paper also about the Uzbekistan under Miziyoyev. So it's Otabek Akramov. He will be presenting comparative analysis of internal strategies of Islam Karimov and Shavkat Miziyoyev. Okay, floor is yours. Otabek, are you here? I think he's not here. Okay, so we can pass our last presenter. Sorry for the long pronunciation, Premystaw Datek from University of Warsaw. So he will be talking about Uzbekistan under Miziyoyev. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I will try to share screen. Okay, can you see my presentation? Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so my paper's topic is building regional power, the case of Uzbekistan under Miziyoyev. So to start with, we need to tackle the issue of previous president, Islam Karimov, who pursued policy which was quite balanced, but also isolationist. There was very little foreign investments, etc., in the country. However, Miziyoyev starts a policy which is quite open. He made several serious economic reforms, like lifting restriction on the trade currency, introducing visa-free regime for tourists, or inviting foreign investors. And those changes in Uzbekistan are so serious that increase importance of Uzbekistan in the region. And even probably in several years, we can be talking about Uzbekistan's leadership over the region, or Uzbekistan's as a leading power in the region. So to start with the definition, what is regional power? We have multiple definitions like regional leadership, or major regional power, or regional or local great power. So basically this concept is that the country is powerful in the region. So in our case, it's Central Asian region. It has capability to influence or to create international relations there, introduce some forums, etc., but it's not important globally. So the situation in Central Asia nowadays is, I think that Kazakhstan has a leading place because, for example, its economy is 4 times bigger than Uzbek economy. The society is much more richer than Uzbek society, and also Kazakhstan leads widely known policies like nuclear non-proliferation policy. So to examine whether Uzbekistan can be leading power in Central Asia, I came up with several factors. I divided those factors into internal factors, which are strictly connected with the country, and external factors connected with other countries and organizations in the region. So the first factor is civil liberties. Miziyoyev reforms put a lot of reforms tackling ordinary people. Like, I think the most visible one is the end of common cotton harvest. However, there is, on the other side, there is a risk of corruption and the need to balance those liberties with clans and local governments, because they also want to stay at their places. Next factor is economic diversification, including energy. And Uzbekistan has diversified its export structure, ranging from gas to cotton and some minerals. And Uzbekistan's export structure is more diversified than, for example, Uzbek one, which is based on petrol. Also, in case of energy, we can see some efforts to build first nuclear energy power plant with cooperation with Russia. Next point is develop infrastructure. We can see that Uzbekistan started major programs to build railroads, aviation infrastructure, energy, and road infrastructure, which not only helps to transport, but also create some opportunities for logistics sectors or trade opportunities or touristic sector. Next point is control over strategic companies. As Uzbek government's plan is to privatize more than 1,000 companies, including some banks, some bazaars, some oil and gas sector companies. However, Uzbekistan will not privatize some crucial companies like railways. However, privatization is challenging because of let's say corruption. It's possible in this case. Next point is the development of middle class. Middle class is very important, especially in case of Uzbekistan, because strong middle class can consume more, can develop the country. And without strong middle class, Uzbekistan can face some difficult and very serious problems like social inequality. The next point is the belief about being regional power. I think in case of Uzbekistan, Uzbekistan so far doesn't demonstrate this. We've got Kazakhstan's example. For example, it's Kazakhstan 2050 strategy, which claims that Kazakhstan in next 30 years will be among 30 most developed countries in the world. And now we go to external factors. The main factor is large population and territory. In case of population, Uzbekistan is the most populated country in the region. In case of territory, is third biggest country. However, Uzbekistan has land connection with every country in Central Asia. But on the other hand, Uzbekistan does not border with any big market like China or Russia. So I think in that case, crucial would be the cooperation with Afghanistan, because Afghanistan seems to open its market, especially it's connected with some American aid after the removal of American troops from this country. Also good neighborhood relations, which is in case of Uzbekistan, it goes really well because Miziyoyev visited all the countries in the region, and basically every trip ends with some new trade deals. Also important fact is settling some water and border disputes with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And what is surprisingly interesting, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan even will start some joint military exercises on the Afghan border. Next point is participation in cross-border infrastructure projects. Also, in this point, Afghanistan is very important. This year, Uzbekistan signed the agreement with Afghanistan to sell some electricity over 10 years period. And also Uzbekistan has great advantage in case of electricity, because it was in Soviet times, it was a very important power grid in Central Asia. So Uzbekistan can use it for some leadership efforts. Also, in case of Afghanistan, we can see some road cooperation. It was established the Iran-Afghanistan-Uzbekistan corridor, road corridor, which facilitates the trade in this region. Also, diversification of foreign investment and trade sources is important. Basically, Russian and Chinese capital is let's say equal. Also, there is also American investments, Turkish investments, and European investments are important in this region. And also, the important fact is that Uzbekistan did not join Eurasian Economic Union, which is strictly connected with Russian economic policy. So Uzbekistan tries to lead its own policy. Also, Uzbekistan tries to build new connection with China. It's not so important right now, but after Uzbekistan will build new railroads, it's gonna be more connected, and its opportunity to sell Uzbek products to China. Also important is promoting country in the international environment. Also, Afghanistan is important because of peace process, like 6+3 forum, and some Uzbek efforts to join WTO. And the last point is proximity to markets. As I said before, Uzbekistan does not border huge markets like Russian or Chinese. So I also see the opportunity in Afghanistan because of development of infrastructure. Uzbekistan can sell its product to Iran, to Pakistan, or even to India. And just to conclude, we can observe wide regional and international cooperation in case of Uzbekistan. But nowadays we can still see that Kazakhstan is the main country, let's say the leader of the region. And probably in the future this will slightly change, but maybe not in the way that Uzbekistan will be the leader, but it's gonna be like some kind of duopoly, like we gonna have two regional leaders. However, there are some, I noted two the most important challenges. I mean, social change, especially in case of privatization. Very important is to balance some clan and elites with the rights of citizens. And also Afghan question is very important. I mean, peace talks, I mean, the opening some infrastructure investments, and opening up for trade with this country. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you all. Actually, we have started very primitive images of Uzbekistan at the beginning with the from the movie, and ended with a very modern image of Uzbekistan. So we have started our panel with an early years of Soviet Union and how symbolism and propaganda plays a role in nation building of such a multi-ethnic, multi-national group of states. And then in our second paper, we have seen the story after the independence, after the dissolution of Soviet Union. So we have seen from the Sheirbayev's paper that how different Central Asian republics managed to transit power from leader to leader. And finally, in Kazmiev paper, we have seen the case of Uzbekistan and Miziyoyev attempts to modernize, attempts to make Uzbekistan as a regional power. If you have questions, you can raise your hands. To start the discussion, I have one question for each participant, starting with Yasemin. So I wonder, so you are doing your research in the United States about this propaganda movies from Soviet Union times.
Sorry, can I stop you right there? I'm actually doing, my dissertation is about Turkish TV series in Bulgaria and Russia. So this is just something that I did in order to find out what was done historically. So kind of to juxtapose that with what Russia is reacting to with its own media texts now against Turkish series. So, yeah.
But anyway, your presentation, your study was really interesting, and to see how, I mean, so there is an interest outside Russia about this early Soviet Union propaganda movies and posters, etc. There are many research I heard about, I read about. What about Russia? Is there a interest, academic interest, or any popular interest to this earlier propaganda movies? So this was my question to you. And my question to Sheirbayev, you have presented Central Asian republics, how the power transitions are realized in these 5 republics. I have actually 2 questions to you. First one, why didn't you include Azerbaijan? And the second question is, how these leaders' relations with Russia affect their succession or the sustainability of their rule. And also in the last case, Uzbekistan case, how you didn't mention about Russia at all in your presentation, Premystaw. So how Russia affects this modernization and the regional power project of Miziyoyev. So these are my questions. So when you answer these questions, starting with Yasemin, so we will get questions from the audience too. Okay.
Thank you, Bazan, for the question. But unfortunately, I am not familiar with the Russian Academy and how much interest there is in these propaganda films. However, I think if I may take the liberty to share what's happening these days as far as Russian media, because that is something I know about. What we saw in Lenin's film is very much still at play today, but it looks very different. So, and I can give you examples of that. But that is how I stumbled on this research anyway, because so Turkish television series are immensely popular in Russia. And what's happening is there is a reaction. So there are television dramas produced in Russia and docuseries and even like documentaries that pose it to show what is behind. One of them is marketed. It's called Oriental Wives. And it's marketed as the truth. Again, like Vertov, he was showing that truth, but they say it's the truth behind the spectacular screen of Turkish television series. And there's 16 episodes and only 4 are actually about Turkey. And they're Turkish women or Russian women, but not only Russian either. They're also Central Asian women, Ukrainian women. So you see, there's like this I mean, it's almost, I forgot the geopolitician's name, but it's like almost this reassembling of the Soviet Union in that docuseries. It was fascinating, but it's about how miserable their lives are, basically, and whatever Orientalist images you can think of, they're all in that docuseries. And same with another media text that started being produced at the height of the Russo-Turkish crisis, following the shooting of the Russian military jet over Syrian, although some people say it's not Syrian airspace, but in any case, when Turkey shot down the Russian military jet and all diplomatic relations ceased. So Putin just, I mean, tourism, everything was frozen. It was a huge crisis. And what happened is a drama began to be produced, marketed as the first Russo-Turkish production. But in fact, it was produced by a Russian media company, and it was filmed in Ukraine and in Turkey, and in Ukraine just a year after the Crimea crisis. And even more striking is the name of this drama. It's called East West. Yes, Vostok Zapad, and it's on YouTube. It's fascinating. And there, again, like you see all these parallels and contrasts about what, and of course, East is Turkey and West is Russia. And we know from Sputnik and from RT and from all of these like English language Russian sources that when they say West, they usually don't mean Russia. But here you have like this performance of this like idealist modernity that you can't even encounter in the real West, it seems. And of course, it's like a monolithic, homogeneous, ethnic, Russian, Slavic, Orthodox kind of modernity that's based on like high culture and, I don't know, independent women, basically the opposite of the Turkish version of East, and again with a lot of classic Orientalist elements. So I'll just stop there, but that's why I thought that the Lenin film was fascinating, because the distribution of these texts too, East, West, and Oriental wives, it's not restricted to Russia's borders. They're mostly distributed through channel Domashny, and that has huge viewership in Central Asia. So again, you see like this civilizing mission type like agenda almost, where like, see Turkish women, they just like, I don't know, sit around at home. That's what you see in the drama. They watch TV series. They're fully dependent on men. I don't know, like they don't even want to work. If they work, they don't like their work, and they're irresponsible. They're childish. But then you see the Russian woman and Russian women, not just one. They're attorneys or they're museum directors, and they're involved with so much more than just the, I don't know, details of everyday life. So it's there's almost like an instructive, like a teaching mechanism. It's really interesting. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Interesting stuff. I'll try to find and watch them. Thank you. And thank you, Ozhet, saving me trying to read your longer name. Please, its floor is yours to answer my question.
So you're always welcome. First question was about Azerbaijan. Well, yes, if we remind Bzezhinsky Zbigniew and his chessboard game, Czech game, I don't remember how it's pronounced correctly in English. Yes, he said that Kazakhstan is the shield of Central Asia, Uzbekistan is the soul of Central Asia, and Azerbaijan is, how he said it was, well, the meaning was that it's a way for Central Asia to the Europe. But actually, if we look now, yes, mainly ethnically, we are all Turks, well, except for Tajiks, the Persians. But mainly now, when we are talking about Azerbaijan and main authors, they're saying that Central Asia is 5 states: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan. But if we take into consideration Azerbaijan, we will see that, yeah, it will be the case of succession of power. Actually, one of the successful cases of succession of family of Mr. Aliyev, but no, mainly because of that mainly political scientists. Now they think that Central Asia is 5 countries. Of course, there are a lot of rumors and talks about the terminology. If you look to the terminology of UNESCO, we'll see that Central Asia, it's not only the states, but it's mainly geographical, the South Siberia, West China, but I just use the political terms. And the second question about it was about the influence of Russia, yeah? What I have to say is that each of our countries is a sovereign country and it's our inner issues. So we have to decide by ourselves how we're gonna do it. But the main point here, which is important, is that one of the first visits which each leader, new leader of Central Asian countries is Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, or Tajikistan. The first visits they're doing to two countries. First is Russia and the second is China. So that's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Premystaw?
You asked me about the how Russia affects Uzbekistan, right? I think we should divide this question into like 3 parts. The first part is the economic cooperation, which is, I would say, China is the leading partner, but Russia is still important, like in terms of investment, for example. I would say like 1/3 goes from China, around 20% goes from Russia. However, in terms of military cooperation, Russia is a very important partner. Like we've got Uzbekistan buys a lot of weapons from Russia, and also this is very important. Russia gives Uzbekistan a lot of military support in terms of training. A lot of senior military people train in Russia academies, so that's a very important, because later on they could share Russian view on security issues. And also very important is Russian soft power, especially education. A lot of young Uzbek people go to Russia to study. Of course, some of them go to Europe, to US, but I think most of them go to Russia because of language, and also access to culture. Most of Uzbek people, they speak Russian, so access to Russian culture, Russian ideas about world, etc., is much more easy to share between those countries.
Okay, thank you. Anyone asking who wants to ask question to our speakers? Please raise hand button, use raise hand button, or just send your question here. Anyone?
I've got a question for
Yes.
Ozhet, if possible. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Ozhet, I really enjoyed your presentation and the comparative element of it. I thought that was very informative. But I've got a question for you. I don't know how much information you have about these clan structures within these different Central Asian countries, but I think that they're very interesting. And I was wondering if you had any comment on what seems to me to be a contradiction where there's multiple clans in seemingly all of these, or at least certainly in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, but you have generally successions of power within very small circles. It doesn't seem like these clans and their differences really enter into these transition processes at any point in the historical review that you presented us with us there. So I was just sort of wondering if you had any thoughts maybe on how these clans are still relevant, if they don't actually intervene in transfers of power, or sort of what the distribution of power among the clans is characterized by at this point. Really, anything that you have to say about the clans would be interesting for me. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Well, regarding the clans, it's mainly on the level of rumors, The one notion about the clans, it was, as I said, it was connected to Mr. Rahmon when he was elected first time in 1994. And there is actually article by Mr. Ivanov, I suppose, if I'm not mistaken. And he wrote that actually, yes, warlords, they supported him, and that's why he became the president. And there were also one official article about the Mr. Niyazov, that he used his tribal connections to become the president in the beginning. And that this clan is actually from Arkhal Vilayat, is one of the leadings. About the clans, it's actually is not the case of scientific papers. It's mainly about some kind of journalistic investigation. I think so.
I see. So there's really a lack of empirical information about the clans in general.
Yes, and why
Okay.
not? And why not everyone write something like articles about this in Kazakhstan? There is books, there is articles, but they publish not in Kazakhstan, not in Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. Mainly they wrote by the Kazakhs, Uzbeks who lives abroad.
Mm.
So I think so, because
Okay, so maybe more of a
like
maybe
it
more
was
of
said
a-
in the Soviet movie, East is a tiny thing, Vostok дело тонкое. It's so.
Okay, that's a very interesting answer. That's sort of how it seemed to me from my English speaking perspective, but that's interesting to hear that it's a similar situation even within the region about the lack of information. Thank you very much, Ozhet.
Thank you for your question.
Any other questions? I think we don't have any other questions. So if I may, Özgür Hocam, I will be closing down this panel. So thank you for all the participants presenting their very interesting papers and the organizers organizing these panels and conference under these crazy conditions. So we are all attending from the different parts of the world. It was a very exciting for me, actually. So thank you for all. So hope to see you tomorrow and the day after in other panels. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
May I ask a question?
Yes, there is a question.
I'm sorry, maybe I lost something, but when's the final deadline for submission the full paper?
Okay, for organizer.
Okay, thank you.
Özgür?
Actually, we will email the participants about this issue. Possibly it will be 30th of October.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.